The following program and contents, including the views and opinions expressed by the host and any guest speakers, are solely for informational and entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed are not endorsed or supported by Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The host and guest speakers are solely responsible for their own perspectives, and their views do not reflect those of Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The information provided in this program should not be considered as professional advice or as a substitute for professional consultation. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to form their own opinions and seek independent advice when necessary. Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, and advertisers hereby disclaim any liability for any claims, damages, or losses incurred as a result of the information presented in this program.
Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Thanks for joining us. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you on the X Zone Broadcast Network and the X Zone TV channel divisions of Relmar Media Company, studios and corporate offices in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Have you ever wondered about parallel universes, the string theory, or quantum physics? Have you puzzled over the description of our reality as one giant hologram? With us this hour to explore quantum physics, ancient spiritual wisdom, and reality is Peter Canova. Peter is a highly successful multilingual international businessman who, after a series of life-changing spiritual experiences, began studying and writing on spirituality and consciousness. He's the author of 25 times award-winning First Souls Trilogy and the contributor to the popular Chicken Soup for the Soul series. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So we have your bio indicates that you have several life-changing spiritual experiences. Would you go into that for a little bit with us?
Well, when I was in my 20s, I discovered to my surprise that I was a very accurate medical intuitive. And when my mind kind of put the disbelief of that together, I started experiencing a lot of other phenomena: clairvoyance, clairaudience, remote viewing, premonitions. And, being a Capricorn, I guess, I wasn't just satisfied to have the experience. I wanted to understand the nuts and bolts behind this. So I started pretty much a lifetime of research, beginning with ancient spiritual texts, really focusing on the ancient Gnostic, mystical Judeo-Christian group. And that eventually led me into quantum physics. And you might think, well, how does that relate? Well, the nexus there is that both the ancient wisdom and quantum physics deal with the subjects of matter, light, and energy, which comprise reality as we know it. And so it's not that far-fetched that I would look at both of those different disciplines. And much to my surprise, I found shocking parallels to modern quantum physics in these ancient texts, where I saw that they really predicted almost every major theory of quantum physics, like parallel universes, the Big Bang, the God particle, the quantum field, and so forth. So initially, I wrote a trilogy, as you mentioned, called the First Souls Trilogy, and I tried to incorporate in rather entertaining fictional form some of the principles that I had learned. But then I decided, well, why waste this 35 or 40 years of research? So I compiled that into my current book, Quantum Spirituality, which deals with all these topics.
So when you first discovered you were a medical intuitive, how'd that come about?
Well, I was actually in a course, a formal course. I had seen an advertisement in the paper in Boston where I grew up, and it was to enhance what they called ESP at the time. It's not a term you hear much anymore. It means extrasensory perception, but it was really developing your, intuitive sense. And they had a session one day where you would pair off with another person and they would sit opposite you in a chair, and that person would have an index card of somebody, or different, actually it was a number of index cards of people who had different medical issues, physical or even psychological issues, and all they could do was give you the name, age, and address of the person. If you got something right, they were allowed to say, yes, I have that information. If you got something wrong, they could never say, no, no, that's not here, because that would kind of throw cold water on you and discourage it. All they could say was, no, I don't have that information. So the first case I had, I remember very distinctly, was an elderly gentleman in Miami, and I saw an image of his heart tilted at a rather funny angle, and it looked like the aorta was being pinched off. And I said, "Well, I believe this gentleman has a blockage in his aorta." And they said that's correct. What else can you tell us? And I saw a almost like a metallic looking object at the bottom quadrant of his heart. And to me, that indicated that he had had a pacemaker installed. And they said, yes, that's correct. They asked me what year was the pacemaker installed. So I saw the hands of a clock spinning wildly. And all of a sudden they just stopped still at 10 o'clock, which meant to me 10 years earlier. And I'm going to date myself here a little bit. That was in 1975. And so that would have been 1965. And I that's what I said. And they said, yes, that's correct. So from that point on, I went on to diagnose hundreds of other, cases for people in the medical profession, and in my neighborhood when I was a student in in Boston. They were lining up at my door. I guess it became kind of like a voodoo doctor there, and so that was sort of like the beginning of how it all started.
So it sounds to me like you were just not doing medical intuitive, you were also doing remote viewing.
Yes.
That's what I
Yes,
wondered.
yeah, remote. I did that in some seminars. I did some pretty accurate remote viewing in seminars, and some other things. But in all honesty, what I really these things are all nice and well and good. But to me, I came to realize that you don't want to get caught up in these things like parlor tricks. They're indicative of another force, of something larger out there, and that's really what I was interested in, was pursuing that.
That's a good place to go because, like you said, parlor tricks are parlor tricks. But what
Yes.
really makes it work? Once we figure out what makes it work, do you feel that then we can improve on what we do?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's all about consciousness. That's what it's really all about. I mean, everything that we experience, all the phenomena, everything that is created, visible and invisible, is all a product of consciousness. And to the degree to which you can enhance your consciousness, the degree to which you can attune or heighten your consciousness to contact the source that generated everything, the better your life would be. And I always say to people, look, do you want to live in the basement or do you want to live in the penthouse? Where you live in the penthouse, you get the full panoramic view of life and what it's about, and you understand life's operations. And to that extent, it improves your own life dramatically. And I think that's the real payoff here, is that we can each improve our own lives, and in particular reduce fear, the fear of uncertainty and the fear of unknown. Because in my way of seeing things, fear is the greatest impediment to human existence. It's sort of the root cause of almost everything else that you experience: disease, illness, war. It all really stems from fear when you really look into it. And to the extent that we can control and manage that fear by understanding the operations of reality, we're way ahead of the game.
Is your thought there that understanding reality helps us feel secure within it?
Well, I certainly think that that's part of it. I mean, understanding the way anything works always reduces degrees of uncertainty, and promotes clarity in what you're facing. So yeah, I think understanding the fact that what we view as physical reality is honestly a form of illusion. We're probably the bottom rung in a ladder of many dimensions of existence, of vibration and frequency that precede us. And of course, we only perceive from a physical standpoint, but we know even from the study of quantum physics itself that that's an illusion, because the supposedly solid material world that we experience, we know at the quantum level isn't there. In fact, it Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, back in 1900, which was the dawn of the quantum age, said right then and there, I can assure you there's no such thing as matter, that matter is something that is the product of an intelligent mind. And this intelligent mind brings the frequencies to certain vibrations that we perceive as matter. But all there is really is a quantum field of light energy. And under particular circumstances, it manifests in spheres or dimensions that we call the material, that we call matter. But like I say, it's like a stack of pancakes, and we might be the bottom of the stack.
Just don't put on the syrup, right?
Yeah, please.
So let's dig right into parallel universes. What are
Yes.
they exactly?
Well, I don't believe parallel universes. The right way to look at them is space, is dimensions of space. They're rather frequencies or vibrations of intelligent energy, of consciousness. And these different frequencies can create, or do create, um, parallel existences. Now, we haven't really quite detected that. I think we felt the footprints of parallel universes all the time. We haven't actually broken into another parallel universe, but I think other parallel universes have perhaps broken into us, and that may be part of the UAP or the UFO phenomenon. But really, what they really are is different levels of conscious awareness, different levels of mind, different levels of frequency and vibration is what distinguishes these parallel universes from one another.
Do we as individuals have the capacity to shift our frequency and therefore our awareness of different parallel universes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, that's what happened to me. Um, I and it was with me. With me, it was rather spontaneous, I guess you could say, in a way. With many people, it may come from study, pursuing, a spiritual path, meditation, orientation. There's a lot of different ways that, many different doors that gets you there. But there's no question in my mind that we can develop the perception of other dimensions, or certainly, if not that, other forces at play that affect our lives. Like I said, I mean, there's so many things that I can go back and recount in my life that you can call synchronicities, supposed coincidences. Having not seen a person in years and thinking about them intensely, and all of a sudden you see them on the street. I mean, literally, that's happened to me numerous times. Things like that we call synchronicities. They're really not coincidences. They're attuning into a certain frequency. And since we're all connected, other people can pick those frequencies up. There's a principle in there's a phenomenon in quantum physics called quantum entanglement, and that is where particles that are literally the equivalent of billions of light years apart communicate with each other instantaneously. So let's say, for example, there's a
We're
Gwilda on Earth and there's a Gwilda on Mars, and I pinch the Gwilda on Earth, and the one on Mars goes ouch at the same time.
well, we're going to have to pinch me on the other side of a short station break.
Okay.
Peter and I will return shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. String theory, the multiverse theory, the many worlds theory. There's a lot of theories out there, but what do any of them mean? With us this hour to hopefully shed light on these theories is the author of First Souls Trilogy, Peter Canova. Peter, I must be in another universe here. I can't seem to get my words straight. We were just talking about if you pinch Gwilda in one reality, the other one says ow. And I always have trouble wrapping my head around these multiple realities, or what else would you call them? Multiple universes, even?
Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's only a matter of appearance, because it really is all one universe. It really is all one force that creates these things. Although, as the Hindus say, it's the one appearing as the many. And the fact of the phenomena that we cited before the break about quantum entanglement and how particles, or even people. We've had our Army studies that have showed incredible telepathy of instant communication between people, and even how DNA can actually, human DNA introduced into a vacuum tube can actually organize photons of light into the shape of the DNA. In other words, photons of light follow instructions somehow that are inherent in human DNA. All these phenomena, you say, well, wow, what is this all about? If you think about it this way, one of the ways that they started developing the holographic universe theory, or the idea that we live in a simulated reality, started with the phenomenon of quantum entanglement. And people started saying, well, maybe the way to explain this is, certainly these particles aren't communicating with each other by fiber optics or telephone lines or there's no mechanical means that, between them that allow them to communicate. But maybe what's happening here is that we are all part of the same matrix. We are all in the same matrix. We're just different appearances within that matrix. And that is adequately described by a hologram. Now, a hologram, the unique property of a hologram is you can take any hologram and slice and dice it, no matter how small. Each minute portion of that hologram contains the image of the whole. And so they started to theorize that, wow, maybe that's the way the universe operates. Maybe we are kind of like a giant holographic projection, and that would explain some of these phenomena like quantum entanglement. And that theory was later given some oxygen by, believe it or not, the study of black holes. It's very interesting. A black hole essentially is a star that collapses on itself, and it becomes so dense and so heavy, it actually shrinks down to the size of a pinpoint, but it sucks in everything around it. It sucks in light and debris, other planets and things like that into this black hole. And the black hole has a definite boundary or horizon. And in fact, it is called the horizon or the event horizon. And you would think initially that if you're studying the information that makes up a black hole, and information essentially makes up everything in the world. The world is essentially a bunch of algorithms of information that give form and shape to everything. And the information that makes up a black hole, one would think, resides inside the volume of the black hole. Well,
So we've kind of lost me here. How does the black hole relate to holograms?
Right. Well, this is what I'm telling you right now.
Okay.
The black hole, what they found out in black holes is that you would think that the information that makes up the black hole resides inside the black hole. It doesn't. It resides on the outside of the black hole, the event horizon. And to make it simpler, think of a bucket. Okay. And you would think that the volume of the inside of the bucket is what contains all the information. So if that bucket contains our universe, all the comings and goings of our universe and the earth and everything else, you would think would be happening inside the boundaries of the universe, inside that bucket. But what the black hole study says is, no, that's not true. The reality lies outside on the skin of the bucket, and it is projected inward like a holographic movie or holographic representation.
So who did these studies?
The black holes have furthered the whole idea that we live in a holographic type of reality.
Who did these studies that you're talking about here?
Jacob Bekenstein was one of them, partially built on the work of Stephen King. And there were a few others whose names I can't recall right now, but there was a long chain of physicists that sort of contributed in one way or another, to this. David Bohm and others, were developing holographic theories probably over a period of about 3 decades.
So for those of us lay people, myself included, how do you prove something like that?
Well, I mean, physically, they proved what we just talked about, which is that the information that makes up a black hole resides on the outside of the black hole. That's something that the physicists have proven. Now,
How do they prove it? I don't understand this. I mean, it's out there. It's a black hole. You can't put it underneath a microscope. How do they prove it?
well, I can't really it's very hard it's very hard to describe. I mean, technically how all that works. I mean, it really would be something that's very difficult to explain in a short time. But what I will say is that the extrapolation of that into the fact that we may live in a holographic universe, yes, for sure, it's theoretical. But again, what happens in science, as in so many other disciplines, is even if you don't have an exact smoking gun, you have a large compilation of circumstantial evidence that points in a certain direction. But that's why we call it a theory. A theory is something that has cogent reasons to it. It appears to be moving in the right direction, although it's not proved yet to be conclusive. I would say that that's sort of where we're at with the holographic universe.
So it's basically, like you said, theoretical, but we're basing we're making a lot of assumptions based on these theories. Yes.
I think that the development of the theories themselves are largely based on observations and with a certain amount of assumptions inherent in them.
So does our reality change when our assumptions and our theories change?
Well, these are some fairly abstract questions. I think that I think it's fair to say that, it's sort of like this. When the American frontier was developing, there were things that were happening out in the frontier that would eventually shape our entire continent, but they weren't obvious to the people back east for quite some time. The frontier is the frontier. It's the avant-garde. And then it takes time for that information to be absorbed and collated back in the more settled areas. I really think that that's pretty much the way that science works. We're making discoveries, and those discoveries have to be vetted and studied and analyzed, and eventually they move from theory more to leaning towards fact. Einstein's E equals mc squared and the theory of relativity, even though it's been proven time and time to work and describe the operations of the universe, are still classified as theories. Okay,
And those
because there could be
theories
possible sections.
are those theories by their very nature fairly incomplete because of our capacity to conceive of something as large as the entire universe.
I think almost everything we're talking about can be described as being incomplete. We don't have the final answers really to anything. We have footprints and we have indications that lead us in in these directions.
Well, that's the mystery and the fun of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you really believe that parallel universes exist? And if so, how much access do we have from one to the other?
I do believe they exist. When I was experiencing all these phenomena and all these different things were happening to me in my life that changed the direction of my life, I was clearly in contact with information from somewhere. Where did it come from? I didn't know this stuff. I mean, when my books, okay, my first book of the First Souls Trilogy, Pope Annalisa, they wrote articles about it in Om Times magazine over how many of the geopolitical predictions in the book came eventually to pass. Now, this was written years before these events happened. Where did this information come from? In some regards, when I wrote this book, I didn't even feel like it was me that wrote it. I felt like it was being written and I was transcribing it because
So
I was
does,
channeling information.
does that go back to the information is on the outside of the bucket?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
The information that we're talking about on the outside of the bucket that projects into what we consider physical reality, this is information that is coming from the larger source, that's coming clearly from another dimension, or I would say frequency or vibration of existence that we don't directly detect, but the effects of it can become apparent to us. You see, and
Are we?
that's why so many things, as you said before, so many things stay theoretical because we feel the effects of them. It's just that How do you prove what's on the other side of the Big Bang? We know the Big Bang happened at some point, and it was something coming into
Well,
something coming out of nothing.
we assume it
Yeah,
happened.
but
Nobody was there, right? You can't prove
right,
it.
right. But the whole idea behind the Big Bang was the appearance of something from nothing. We can go right up to the borders of the something, but we can't cross over to the other side to see what exactly happened on the other side of the Big Bang.
So when we go back to the bucket theory and the information is on the outside of the bucket, are we the lenses through which this information then takes form in physical reality?
Well, I think there's no question that we are participants in this whole process of creation. If you look at the Gnostic Gospels, essentially the whole idea behind the creation was that this one source of consciousness projected other points of consciousness beyond itself. And what made those points of consciousness pretty much the same thing as the parallel dimensions we're talking about is not that they dwelled in a particular space. It was the frequency of their consciousness awareness. So in order for all encompassing consciousness to project something outside of itself, or for something to feel that it was separate from this source consciousness, there had to be a limitation of the consciousness itself. Because if we weren't limited in consciousness, we'd be the supreme consciousness, would be absorbed back into the supreme source that projected everything. But the reason why we think we're individuals is because we operate out of a limited consciousness. And again, in order to give an analogy that makes it more understandable, because this stuff can get heady and abstract, so I always like to use some analogies to make it more clear to people. If the source is like an electrical power grid, the way a power grid operates is the raw energy from the source has to be stepped down to be of use, and you
Well,
step it down.
we're going to have to get into source and stepping down again
Okay.
on the other side of a commercial break. Peter and I will be back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Are we living in a cosmic holographic movie? With us discussing the nature of reality is Peter Canova. I'm sorry, Peter. His website, petercanova.com. Peter, we were talking about a holographic reality, holographic universe, and you had mentioned super consciousness. With all the ancient studies that you've done and the ancient religious texts and everything, would you equate that to God?
It doesn't really matter what you call it. You can call it the force, the one, God. It's all the same thing. It's all one consciousness. It doesn't. The names that we give it really don't matter. It remains what it is.
So the Native American view of the Great Spirit would be talking about this supreme consciousness or whatever.
Yeah, I think any expressions of higher spiritual force, especially one that was involved with the creation, regardless of the culture or the time, would be pretty much, expressing the same thing. It's only our human agendas that divide things up. Like, my God's different from your God. That's just really not the case,
A lot of wars have been fought over it anyway, though, right?
unfortunately.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when we start to view the world as holographic, or our reality is holographic, what kind of power does that give us over it?
Well, let me get back to something that we were talking about before the break, because really, with all the different names that we try to ascribe to this force that we're speaking of, whether it's God or anything else, it's really consciousness. It's a conscious, intelligent energy. And that conscious, intelligent energy permeates everything in creation. It forms everything in creation. And as I was saying just before the break, if you liken it to an electrical power grid, and the way a power grid operates is it has a source, a raw source of energy. And that source, in order to be used, needs to be stepped down in frequency and vibration, which it's done, and then it's relayed through by different relay stations to the ultimate use. Well, we are kind of like those relay stations. We are really part of the same consciousness that created the entire universe in a particular form. We're essentially spiritual energy in material form. We're spirits having a human experience, as you may have heard said sometimes. So to that extent, yes, we have participated in the creation at one level or another. Now, we are multidimensional beings also. So I really believe that each of our particular forms of individual consciousness has analogs at other levels of existence, at other higher levels of existence, and at those levels. But even down here in the material level, we certainly exert influence over the creation and the shape of our world.
So if we have influence over it as an individual, do we have greater influence as a group?
Certainly, as Jesus said, when people come together and, in my name, it exerts a more powerful force. There's no question that people that have like-minded intention and they put energy into that intention, it it's kind of like a multiplier effect. And yes, it does. I do believe that it does have more of an effect. But as far as the individual is concerned, to the extent that we attune ourselves to these higher energies and we awaken our own personal consciousness in the understanding that it is part of a greater force, we increase our own ability to influence things around us. Now, I'm
Now,
not.
can we go backwards just a little bit? When we were talking about how if one person has influence over what manifests in reality, a group has greater influence. That begs the question, who's controlling the reality right now with all the attention that people spend to media and this and that and the next thing? Who's really controlling our reality?
Well, I think the way my own opinion of the way things operate is that there's a template that is laid out before us. There's a blueprint that is laid out before us of intention by this one force. Uh, that's like a choice that we have. We within that blueprint, we have choices that we make that influence the way the blueprint actually operates. So you can have the architect give you blueprints, but if you make changes in the field, it's going to affect the way the final product works. And I think that's actually the way it works with us. I think, you do have conflicting agendas of people, and those things kind of all come into play, at some point and affect the final shape of what we experience as reality.
So, while we're talking about consciousness, we've been talking about it in a very large term. How about individual consciousness? I've heard from numerous sources that most of our awareness is unconscious versus conscious. So, how do we reconcile what's going on unconsciously with what we're creating consciously?
Well, that kind of relates to the point that I was talking about a few minutes ago, which is that to the extent that we attune ourselves to this higher source of consciousness, it does start to change our individual reality and our outlook on the world. And by example, I told you my own experience when all of a sudden I was realizing that there's a whole other dimension of existence out there, and all these things that I was experiencing, things started to happen. Synchronicities that, like I say, people appearing that you think about, haven't seen for years, a couple days later, circumstances that save you from, I have experiences that I wrote in Chicken Soup of the Soul about premonitions that I had that saved my life and my father's life in Africa. These type of things start to come into your life once you've attuned to this. And I always used to say to people, I felt like a person who most of my life was in front of a radio trying to tune it, and all I was getting is static. But all of a sudden, I hit one clear channel, and I realized that it had been out there broadcasting 24/7 all my life through all eternity, in effect. But it took me to fine tune it to get it. And I think that that's the way it works, with us, to the extent that we let our unconscious rule our lives. We usually end up not so well off, but to the extent that we start to make these influences in our lives conscious by attuning to them, we gain more of a measure of control. And I think better things happen to us.
Do you think that our deja vus, our synchronicities, our hunches, do you think those are a bleed through, if you will, from the other frequencies to give us a clue that there's more going on?
Yeah, I absolutely think that a lot of that is what's in play here when you experience phenomena like that. And you'll find that as you get more and more in tune with this energy, you'll have more and more experiences like that.
Kind of like
So,
when you're driving down the road and you're listening to one station and suddenly another station starts coming through,
mhm.
and you'll be hearing somebody talking about news, and then you'll flip back into the music and then there's static between the two. Is this where we are right now? And does that relate to the frequency that we're at?
Well, you know, the human race has certainly still got a long way to go, and we we have indications in the scriptures where it says when enough people get enlightened, then that's when the kingdom of heaven is realized on earth. That's when the veil between these dimensions starts to break down. And it could very well be that one day we evolve to such a state that we actually have the ability to go in and out of physical bodies. Now, it sounds kind of trippy, but if you look at some of the famous psychics like Edgar Casey and others, and those that have actually projected themselves back to the very early stages of creation, what they tell us is that at one time, we came in as spiritual energy with the ability to go in and out of physical forms. We eventually got trapped in those forms as we started to identify with the reality as the boundaries of our skin, and we became sort of trapped in these material forms. It's kind of like, do you remember the old there was this Star Trek series where the crew went to the holodeck and they could project themselves in these immersive 3D virtual realities where they could actually interact with the characters. And sometimes they actually sort of forgot that they were the programmers and not part of the program. Well, essentially, I think that's what happened to us here. We were part of the programming, but we got lost in our own programs.
Do you think that where we are in the universe, of course, that changes frequency, right? Our trek through the universe, and whatever ambient frequencies are there where we are. Do you think that the frequencies from the space around us influences human development? And can it go
I,
up and down?
Yeah, I do think my own personal feeling is that the influences of other dimensions bleed through and affect our universe. Look, just take energy itself. Okay, believe it or not, scientists do not know what energy is. If you ask a scientist what energy is, they cannot give you a definition. They can manipulate it. They can describe it under certain circumstances, its operations, but they don't know where it originates from. And they really don't understand anything about the source of all the various energies that permeate our universe, where they come from, or, whatever. I do believe that many of these energies come from other dimensions and have, influence in one way another on us here. So, it's all interrelated. I mean, we talk about separate or parallel dimensions, but what we have to remember is at some level they do interact. They are related to one another. They're not totally walled off from one another.
Well, we're about to go into another station break, but on the other side, I'd really like to get into, are there really any walls to start out with? Please stay with us as Peter and I explore the vast concept of consciousness. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you have a product or service you'd like to promote to a worldwide audience? Imagine your product featured on Mission Evolution Radio TV. If you're interested in showcasing your work, Mission Evolution is broadcast to the X-Zone TV Channel 32 Simul TV, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, and many other audio and social media platforms. Our professional studios can produce and broadcast your custom high-quality ad. It will be permanently embedded in each episode and featured in the archives for years to come. Together, we can make it happen. contact us at info@missionevolution.org for more details. Spaces are limited, so don't miss out on this great opportunity. Email info@missionevolution.org today. How conscious are you? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with the author of the First Souls Trilogy, Peter Canova. Peter, consciousness is kind of what we've been talking about all along here. What is it exactly? I mean, we've been dancing around it, but what is consciousness?
Well, the attributes of consciousness are direction and tension, uh, and and instruction in a way. I sort of view consciousness very similar to the way human DNA operates. DNA provides the information that creates the various forms of our bodies, and not just us, but of all pretty much all life on Earth here. And I view consciousness the same way. Consciousness is an intelligent force that has intention and provides direction. So, uh, if you really want to look at it in one regard, the parallel universes that we've been talking about, the different frequencies or vibrations of this consciousness that we're talking about, are really nothing more than saying, here are the different forms. Here's the DNA that consciousness takes as it projects itself out with an intention to experience itself at every possible level of creation. So if we look at ourselves, and we mentioned this before, as human beings, we're spiritual energy having a material experience. And I often say to people, the purpose of humanity really is to be like the fingers of God touching the face of this world. And our purpose is to spiritualize the material and bring the experience of the material back to spirit. So I guess that's the best way I can sum up what consciousness is and how it operates.
So, what happens when we die?
Well, I think when we die, it's just a shifting of consciousness. It's a shifting of our conscious focus. We no longer focus on ourselves as a physical body. We're now back in some state, and it could be any number of different states. I don't think there's any one place, one frequency or one level of consciousness that you go to, but certainly you go to a different level. I won't even say necessarily a non-material level of consciousness, because there's all levels of materiality. There's a finer etheric kind of materiality, and then there's a more pure, just an energetic form of consciousness. But we go to one of those places anyway. We go to a form that's different from what we're at right now. In fact, a lot of people in scripture say that, we're somewhere else dreaming ourselves into this life. So maybe we just wake up from that dream.
Yeah, the Aboriginals, I know, hold to that we dream reality. So,
Mhm.
speaking of which, what does happen when we sleep when we're talking about consciousness? I mean, we spend a third of our lives doing it. How does that fit in here?
I think that it's we tend to contact that realm or a different realms in consciousness when we're asleep, when our waking consciousness kind of takes a back seat. It allows other levels or vibrations of consciousness to enter in. So in effect, perhaps our subconscious, our unconscious, becomes our conscious in dreams itself. We alternate between these different levels of mind, and that's actually a proven fact in brainwave theory, that you have that alpha, beta, theta brain waves. And when you're in a deeper state of meditation or sleep, you slow down into like the theta state, and that's indicative that your conscious mind has kind of gone to sleep in effect, and that these other parts of your mind which are maybe connecting with these other levels of reality, are sort of taking over. So I'm not a big dreamer, but we all dream to one extent or another, and perhaps those dreams in some other level of reality are things that are happening, or messages that we're getting in order to better conduct ourselves, at this level of reality.
And this stuff is really hard to wrap your head around, obviously. But the feeling I've been getting is that there are no boundaries. except the ones that we impose on ourselves. So what we are consciously aware of becomes our reality, but in truth, we're just in this huge soup. Is that anywhere close to accurate? And if so,
I think
how
so.
how do we isolate and create the reality that we've all agreed upon is reality?
Well, look, we all know that part of the meditation process is sensory deprivation. So, that's why people go into those, what is it? Those, water tanks and hyperbaric oxygen chambers and things like that, because it's the physical senses that we've developed that largely keep us locked into the mentality of this world. And when those take a back seat, it's when we start to, experience snippets of the other realities, as you talked about. And I think, yes, it's accurate to say that we're all part of the quantum field. We're all part of this one consciousness. But we've so chosen to condition ourselves and focus on the idea that physical reality is the ground state of all being, and we believe that, and we kind of stay focused on that. But yet you can break out of that. I mean, to a lot of people throughout history, to a certain extent, have broken out of that and have kind of, I guess the best way to say it is they've glimpsed outside the matrix.
So the bucket is an illusion, actually.
The bucket is absolutely an illusion. What goes on inside the bucket, like we're saying, is a projection of forces that are coming from another dimensional frequency. And this is sort of the template that I was talking about. I think the way that life and reality works is that this supreme being, God, the source, whatever you want to call it, does set out a template. It's like a buffet or a banquet. And essentially, we can choose courses from amongst that. And to the extent of those choices, we affect the outcome of that template. We affect the outcome of that product. I gave the example of the architect. The architect has a blueprint, but when you make changes in the field, it affects the outcome of the product. And I do believe that that's the way things work.
So it's about time in the show when I get to ask you, Peter, what is your mission?
Well, I had certain experiences and I felt they changed my life for the better. They certainly changed the course of my life. And I wanted to share those with people. And at first, I did it by writing a series of spiritual thrillers, the First Souls Trilogy. But then I decided to take all the research that I've done over 35 or 40 years and compile it into a book called Quantum Spirituality. And what it really is I'm trying to provide a roadmap for people on their spiritual journey. And like any map, you will need at least two coordinates to have the map make sense: north, south, latitude, and longitude. The coordinates that I used were ancient spiritual wisdom and quantum physics. And what I show is the parallels of what they're saying about all the subjects that we've talked about today: parallel universes, the creation, the nature and operation of reality. Once we see two different disciplines essentially pointing in the same direction, I think it provides us with a base of knowledge that really helps us on our spiritual journey. So my purpose is to sort of inspire people, give them information, and essentially be a signpost for them on their road to reaching a higher level of consciousness, however that may be.
So how can we take what's the first step for our audience to move towards this larger consciousness? How can we use this information that we've been talking about for the past hour? How can we use this to take the first step into tuning into a broader reality?
Uh, it's a thing that people arrive to by many different paths, and a lot of it has to do with your motivation. And the thing about motivation is, look, with some people like me, things happen spontaneously. I didn't expect any of this. It happened to me, and then it just spurred me on to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm getting this message that there's something else out there, and I want to pursue, and I want to understand what this is about. For other people, it could be less positive experiences. It could be that, they've experienced a tragedy in their life, a loss. They've been on drugs. They've hit the bottom of the barrel, and they finally say, wait a minute, there's got to be more to life than this. So what it all boils down to is motivation. You have, in order to start anything, there has to be an initial motivation. And I can't really tell people how to motivate themselves. They have to come to some point where they can be motivated to study and understand these things. What I can do is once they've reached a certain level of understanding or motivation, I can help them with a certain base of knowledge that might inspire them to say, wow, this is fascinating stuff. Maybe I should look more into this because, this is dealing with quantum physics. It's dealing with ancient spirituality. It's dealing with depth psychology, like people, Carl Jung described. It's dealing with the latest findings in neurophysiology and, epigenetics. There's so many scientific discoveries out there now that even scientists themselves, who traditionally have been the bastion of materialism, like if it can't be testable, it's not real. That's starting to change. And there's a growing minority of scientists right now that are realizing all the things that we talked about, which is that consciousness is the ground state of existence, and that everything that we experience came from consciousness, as opposed to the old scientific materialist model that says, oh, we're life the great accident. We were a bunch of chemicals in a soup, and we somehow formed more complex organisms that led to humanity. That just doesn't work. It's not provable and even testable by their own methods. And in fact, it fails by their own methods. So it's not a good explanation. A far better explanation for the phenomenon of the world is to start with consciousness and work your way down.
So we're virtually out of time for the program, but what's your vision if we all start, not all, but a number of us start to seek a higher level of consciousness?
If you believe what the ancient scriptures tell us, that one day, if enough of humanity reaches an understanding, the kind of understanding that Jesus and other sages did about the way that the world works, that you reach a critical mass. And Jesus said at that point, that is when the kingdom of heaven, will come to earth. Uh,
That would be a wonderful thing to see.
yeah,
We are unfortunately out of time, Peter. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Our guest this hour has been Peter Canova, the author of the award-winning First Souls Trilogy. To find out more about Peter and where you can get his books, visit his website, petercanova.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But most importantly, please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.